Hi, this is Sarah, the Stitchin Mommy, and I'm here again for another Stitch With Me video. Today I'm working on my Snow Queen by Shannon Wasseliff. It's now on her website, I believe under the name Winter Queen, but when it was in the World of Cross Stitching magazine in I think December 2016, it was called Snow Queen. So Snow Queen or Winter Queen. ShannonChristineDesigns.com is where you can find it now. I'm beading and backstitching as I go, and today I was going to show you just some regular cross stitching because there's some fractionals in here, and this is Aida, and I know some people know they don't like that, but it is possible to do. And I was thinking of adding some beads too, which I bead very cheaply most of the time, and I'm not opposed to change, but at the moment I thought I would share how you can bead without a lot of extra mumbo jumbo and just make it easy and cheap and possible. So first I'm just using DMC. I'm working in her skirt with this lightest color of purple, and I think I'm right here. This is 14 count Aida, so it's quite large compared to, I just want to make sure I know where I am before I get started here. It's quite large compared to what I have been stitching on. Occasionally I've been doing 1/1 on like 28 count. But it's actually really pretty and it's working out really well. This would be the equivalent if you were doing 28 count, 2/2. Which, if you were choosing to do this design or a design like it, I might recommend that to do. I think the recommendation in the magazine is 25 count 2/2, but I thought that was too big. So 28 count or 32 count, 2/2, 2 threads over 2 threads of fabric. Would be really easy for these fractionals, and right now I don't have any fractionals, but I had this is where my thread was when I stopped last night, so I'm just going to keep going and I'll get to some fractionals in a little bit. But 14 count Aida is actually really nice to work on. It takes a lot of the complications away of even weave or linen, of like having to count double, which you get used to really easily. But if you're looking for a nice stitch that's not gonna, that you could do anywhere or you could do when you're tired or don't have good lighting, it's a nice one. I chose this fabric because I had it in my stash from my grandma, and it was the perfect color, not the perfect size. It's way too close to the edge on, I have like a 1/2 inch margin on each side, which I think because the fabric is so stiff, it'll be fine for framing. I'll just need to find a frame that fits really well. Yeah, so it was the perfect color and I had it, and I had almost everything in my stash already. I had to buy, I think, 1 Krynic and 2 beads. Maybe not even the Krynic. I might have even had that. I only had to buy 2 of the 3 beads. I had 1 already. These white ones I had before, and they're kind of irregular, and I don't know if they're better now. The silver ones are new, and they are much nicer beads. The date on the back of my white beads is 1999, and the date on the back of the silver ones is 2004, but I did buy them this year, so they were manufactured a while back. Or I bought them in 2017, I guess. So in a minute, I'll show you maybe some of the different types of fractional stitches. or situations where you would want a fractional stitch, and what I do. And it's what I do actually sometimes depends on the count of the fabric. Because this is 14 count and the squares are so big, sometimes I'll stitch more of a stitch than I would if it were on 32 or 18, because the back stitch will cover more of the block in those cases and not leave as much white space, whereas on 14 count you'll have a lot of extra fabric that you need to make sure is covered. Okay, so this section is done now. And if you've noticed from my other Stitch With Me videos and from my update videos, I'm a fairly casual stitcher. I'm not out to win any prizes. I'm just having fun. So this is just how I've been doing things for almost 30 years, because I started cross stitching when I was really young. And I'm having fun with it, so it works for me. If what I do doesn't work for you, then do it your way. It's all about making it work for you and have fun with it. So I just realized I don't know if I was in the frame that whole time, so we'll have to check that back in editing. I'm just stitching away, having fun stitching. There's a bead here, as you can see, and you can totally stitch around beads. Like, they're in the same space, they're in the same location, at least these regular seed beads. They're in the same area as any other stitch, so it's not going to mess anything up to stitch beads and stitches right next to each other. You do want to wait for back stitching until all the stitches in the surrounding area are finished, because the back stitching should lay on top. But with beads, it's not as important, because you don't really want to see those threads that are holding the beads in anyway, so it doesn't really matter if you stitch a stitch next to a bead after the bead is there. So here's a first fractional, and you'll see I already have this darker purple here already, and so I've already split the Aida right there. So for this second leg, I'll come down right where that other one is and make sure I hit the same hole that the first string went in. If I'm doing this for the first time, I'll just do an example here. When you come up, you want to make sure you're right in between, like all the up and down weaves and the sideways weaves, so that the hole is right in between. And likewise if you're doing it on top, but a lot of times I'll start them from the back side. In this case, the back stitching here, I'll share with you a few things on this part of it. This one is let's do a direct diagonal. A direct diagonal, you can see there's big symbols and little symbols. But when they're a little symbol, it represents a fractional stitch. So that would mean there's a quarter stitch here. Some people might choose to do a 3/4 stitch where you do a little short one like I just did and a long one, and pick which color you want to do to emphasize that in that square for the long stitch. And this would be a little quarter and this is a little quarter, and then 3/4 would be one of them, if that makes any sense. I don't do that because it's got back stitching right here, and the back stitching will be my line. So if you can see on here, I did that same spot. There's a little quarter stitch on one side and a quarter stitch on the other, and then the back stitching line goes right in between the two. Another example of what you might see on a chart is right here, where there's the back stitching is diagonally over two different blocks. In this case, it shows a full large symbol of the different colors in each side of the backstitching. Because this is 14 count, I have been stitching a full cross in both boxes just to keep things smooth. I don't want any fabric or as much fabric showing. So this is that example right here, where I have two full blocks of the different colors and the backstitching went right in between. And you can see a touch of the color on the opposite side, but I like how it's nice and smooth and full. If this was 16 or 18 count or the equivalent even weave or linen, I might do a 3/4 stitch on this each side with a little fractional to go to the middle and one long stitch on each side. And then have this backstitching kind of fill up these other corners. But because it's 14 count, I'm going to go ahead and do a full cross. And the other instance that you see here a lot is where the backstitching crosses all 3 stitches. There's a full stitch, and then 2 quarter stitches in the middle. And that's how that looks. This is this one right here. Full stitch, and 2 quarters in the middle with the backstitching running in between them. That's how I like to do my fractionals on 14 count. Like I said, occasionally I will do 3/4 stitches in the case of when there's a diagonal over 2 blocks, so it's not quite so bulky if it's on 16 or 18 and there's fractionals, which would be the equivalent of 32 or 36. Let's see. This pattern is a little bit tricky in that I need to constantly be looking at it. So it's a little bit slower on the video because I need to make sure I can't motor along quite as much as I used to because I have to make sure I'm doing everything the way I need to. There's a lot of fractionals, there's a lot of beads that I have to make space for. And what I like to do is I like to do my fractionals in the direction, when I'm doing that direction of stitch. So this time I'm doing these legs here. There is a tiny fractional in this color this direction, right here. But since it's on the other leg, I'll do it when I go back because I just like to keep it kind of consistent with the other legs around it. So this is another fractional right here. Then I'll go back. And when I finish this string, I'll just go ahead and do some beading for you, because why not? I have no problems beading at the same time as my stitching, and I will be back stitching this area as soon as I have a sufficient number of cross stitches for the areas that need back stitching. So pretty soon I'll be able to back stitch the top little chunk of this dress too, with all these little leaves and vines and some swoops on the dress, so that'll be fun too. So there's that one that I did. That's the top leg, the top corner of this one right here. Now there's a bead there I got to make a room for. How many of those? 5 of those. And one thing that's kind of interesting to get used to when you're on 14 count and you're used to stitching on smaller things is that your thread runs out so much faster. It's pretty funny. You're like, oh wow, I can't actually do another, dozen stitches. I can only do maybe 2 or 3. So it's kind of an interesting getting used to that again. There was one time last year when I was first working on this that I was also working on my 40 count Heaven and Earth design in the same like week. And so it was very strange going from 1/1 half stitches on 40 count to 14 count. That was like, these stitches looked enormous. So that my string won't be able to do another row of these big stitches, so I will go ahead and tie this off, as I like to do, just running it under some previous stitches. Got my needle minder from, I think, Kitten Tree Gifts, and Dawn Frosty X Stitch gifted it to me. I had this on my winter chatelaine, but I pulled it on over here because this is wintry too. So I have, on this piece, I'm using DMC to bead just because it's easier and I had it. And this is pretty much a Stitch from Stash project. So that's what I'm going to show you. I have used invisible thread in the past. I did not love it. It's kind of hard to work with. I have not tried Nymo. I am not opposed to trying Nymo. I just have not yet tried it. So maybe at some point I will. And then maybe I'll never even consider DMC after that. I'm not sure, but because I have heard good things about it. But this is more just an example of the fact that you can bead with DMC. You don't have to go buy anything special. If you have the beads, you have the fabric, you need a thin needle, something really thin that will go, the eye is thin as well, that will go through the bead without trouble. Then you can bead on anything. I don't have a tacky bob. I've never had a tacky bob. I don't doubt they would be helpful. But again, you don't have to have one to bead. So I just wanted to share this method because it's kind of like beading on a budget. So I have 2 beads that I'm using in this section, and I'm going to use B5200 for both of them. The white in this pattern is B5200. I have decided that the silver clear color looks just fine with the white thread also. So I'm going to go ahead and do both of them with that color, and it saves a lot of time. I went ahead and used the bright red from her lipstick to attach the red beads, but the white and silver beads I'm using B5200. What I do, I leave them in their little boxes. If I had a fancy bead storage, again, that would probably maybe be a little bit easier to keep them from like spraying all over the place. But again, you don't need it to make it work. It's possible to bead without all the fancy gadgets. Those gadgets are helpful, I'm sure, and nice, but not necessary. So if you're worried about, oh, I don't have this and this and this, I can't do a beading project, don't worry about it. Just do it. All you need is a skinny needle and the beads. So what I like to do is I like to, turn it over, make sure it's already open. Cut these side things if you're using mill hills. Make sure they're kind of settled on the bottom of the bag, of the box, and carefully open the box or the package. And I just fold this back to keep it from, because if you don't fold it back too hard, it'll kind of get in the way. So I like to fold it back, make sure it's flat, and I just sit it on the side of my side table. And I'm going to open this one too, because I'm going to go back and forth. Open it all the way and set it on my side table. And now I'm going to start my thread by anchoring my thread. So this is the first hole I'm going to put a bead into. So what I like to do is, this is roughly where the hole is. I'm going to pull, run my needle away from that hole first, and then run it back towards the hole. So that gives you like an extra firm anchor for the end of your bead thread. And then I attach these mill hill beads with a half stitch. on my chatelaine, I've been attaching the Delica beads with a full cross because they're perfectly uniform and they're small. They fit up and down in these spaces quite well. On 14 count, these little red ones and maybe even the silver ones would work up and down on 14 count. But these white ones are they're a little longer and some of them are skinny. They wouldn't work up and down, I don't think. They would look funny, and they need the room of the diagonal of the block to be able to fit, especially in a dense area like this. So I'm going to go ahead and only use a half stitch. So I just picked out a bead out of the container. I dump it on my fabric, and then I put a bead on the needle, and I poke it back down in the direction of the first leg of a cross stitch, which is a half stitch. And then I'll just do that for all the other beads. That bead is done. Super fast, super easy. As long as you have a skinny needle, you shouldn't have any trouble getting the bead on your needle, on your thread. It should be a very painless process. And if you choose a color that matches the bead as close as possible, you can totally use regular cotton embroidery floss to bead with. Nymo is more invisible, so you can probably bead a variety of colors all with the same string. So if you have a large variety of color changes in your beads, it would probably be extra helpful to maybe invest in some Nymo thread. But it is definitely doable with DMC, and you don't have to worry about any weird issues with synthetic thread when you're using DMC, because it's just DMC. And this little bunch of beads here has a few silver ones right in the center around this red one here. So when I get there, I'll just go ahead and pick out a silver bead out of the box next to me. Since I have my beads open next to me, this is definitely something that you want to do when you don't have the risk of somebody else coming over and bonking your table or knocking over your things. I know Belinda Aussie Stitch had been waiting to bead until her kids had at least gone back to school or otherwise preoccupied, because she didn't want anyone to knock over her beads. And I will make sure my kids are occupied or gone, or my cat is really good. She's old now, so she's not really super frisky, but I definitely keep them away from your cat. And in those cases, I could see where a tacky bob could be helpful, because then you wouldn't have to be quite so careful. But I actually have beaded on a couch with my cat on my lap. And this was, what was I beading? It was not that long ago. It was like a month ago. And there was something that I just wanted to finish up, and I was like, yeah, I got this. So we were watching TV, like a hockey game or something, and grabbed my beads. Of course, my cat jumped up to sit on my lap, and I just went for it. She settled down for a nap, and I just was beading. Pretty funny. I think it might have been Royal Holiday, trying to finish up Royal Holiday, because that's something I've done recently with beads. And as you'll see, all these are laying kind of at a diagonal because I'm only attaching them with a half stitch. If you were to do a full cross, what you would do is, after this full cross, I'll show you, you come back up where the next leg of your cross stitch would be, and then you would go back through the bead and then go back down the other leg to finish the cross stitch, and then your bead would be laying up and down at that point. So that's how you would do that if you like that. And I have been doing that with my Delica beads on my chatelaine, since they are a lot more uniform and a lot smaller. They fit in the space. I'm doing that project on 32 count also, which is the equivalent of 16 count, and I'm still able to put them on with a full cross and have them be up and down. So, but these mill hills don't really lend themselves to that. So I usually do mill hill beads on an angle like this, and I'm able to get them on 32 count at an angle as well. So here's getting to be the center. Looks like there is a square of Krynic in here too that I'll have to do later. But again, I'm okay with doing beads and cross stitching out of order, shall we say. The thing that you have to watch, I guess, if you bead before you stitch, is that your threads will sometimes catch on the beads. So you just have to be a little bit more cautious and not just yank your thread as you're pulling it down the fabric, because it could catch on the surrounding beads. So you don't want to like rip a bead, stretch your fabric out or anything. Your beads should be anchored pretty well if you do it this method, because it's all the same string, so they're not going to fall off if you just tug on one of them. So this row should have some silver beads. So if my thing cuts out in a minute here, hopefully you can still see some of the silver beads go on, because they're pretty. So sure enough, my camera ran out before I got to the silver beads, so I'll do just a touch here more for you. So I want you to see, they're so pretty. So here we are, the row right above this red one. If you hopefully this was an enjoyable video. Excuse me. If you have any questions about how I bead, or feel free to ask. Here's going to be a silver one, so I'll just grab a silver bead out of that box and add that in. Someday I may get some Nymo, especially if I have a project that calls for a variety of colors all in one space. That might be a good investment to try. But a lot of times I just use DMC and the projects turn out fine. I think I have invisible thread on like one of my Mirabilias, but like Royal Holiday I just finished was all DMC attaching the beads. I like to pick colors. Uh-oh, where did that one go? You will have the occasional drop, but that's alright. That happens. Yeah, I like to pick a bead, a thread color that matches the color of the bead. Especially if it's sort of see-through, then the color that's going through the bead will make a difference in the finished look. So you just want to make sure it's got the look that you're going for, and try to be as stealthy as possible with your choice. And just one strand of DMC is all I use. I don't want it to be this big thick thing going through the bead. I enjoy beading. It's fun. Looks like I have a knot here. Oh, just a fuzz. Okay. Once you've done the next bead, the bead previous to that should be, you know, firmly in place. They're not loosey-goosey. Here's another silver one. This is like a big snowflake brooch of or something that's holding her skirt layers up in a gathering them all up in this on this side of her skirt here, which is kind of fun. Cause see, they're all in here pretty tightly, and they're doing all right. That silver bead was pretty big, but it still fits. And then I get to go on and enjoy the rest of my piece with these sparkly, pretty beads, filling out the space and just so happy. Oops. See, there, it got caught. So if you just let it go, and let's see, it looked like there was another one over here that was probably just part of the dress, but since I'm right here with my string, I'll go ahead and do this one now. It's not part of the snowflake. There are beads throughout her dress as well, so I'll be doing those also at some point. And this one I think is just meant to be part of her dress. Okay. Because you'll see over here there's some holes where there's going to be silver and white beads in a pattern, along with some Kreinik starbursts and things. It's very blingy, this pattern. Lots of bling, which I think is Shannon's signature thing. Should I just finish this whole snowflake for you? Why not? They're all nice and nestled in there. That's not right. Oops. I wasn't paying attention. I think I found the other bead that I lost too. So I'll put this one back. I heard something. Yep. I'll have to find that later. So this one right here should be a silver one. I was not paying attention. I was just coming along. So frogging a bead is you just have to make sure not to just let it go. Got to keep a hold on it. Don't usually need to frog beads, but it's not the end of the world if you do. All right, this one needed to be silver. Again, maybe I shouldn't be doing this on camera, but you know, hopefully I'll find them. So that's 2, which is maybe what a tacky bob would be good for. But I blame the camera. I blame the camera because things are always a little bit more awkward with the camera right here. There we go. Accidentally pulled out 2, so I'll just keep them both here and just try to keep the fabric level. And what's this over here actually? That might not be. That's not a bead. There's more DMC over there. This is got a spot of Kranich. So I'm gonna leave that open. Come back and do that later. And ideally, having a long string is kind of helpful because then you can do a whole bunch of beads without, you know, having to tie off your work. It just seems like it's more secure that way. I'm gonna go ahead and do this one over here, kind of all by its little self here. So as you can probably tell, the mill hilt beads are a little bit irregular, but they still look pretty. Let's see. beauty of these stitch along videos is I get to interact with you, share some experience, some tips, and make progress on my projects. Woohoo! Win-win. So let's see what is going on here. Got to be a few more holy openings, which I guess is a benefit of having all the stitching done ahead of time, is it's very clear where the beads are supposed to go. You don't have to worry about, oh, this is an actual, DMC stitch. It's not a bead stitch. You just know pretty much, where the holes are, that's where the beads are. So that is a benefit to making sure all the cross stitches are done ahead of time, but for this purposes, I was close enough and I wanted to include this in my stitch along video, so that's what I did. Still got a few these are a few more Kreinik stitches, it looks like. The edge of one of the colors of layers of her skirt is lined with Kreinik, like this one is up here. It has some Kreinik along the edge, so this thing does too down here. I think this will be the last snowflake bead. And I won't do it on camera here, but I will continue to bead with the remainder of my string until all the string runs out. So I'll just go around the rest of the skirt, filling in any other beads that are here and there and everywhere. So there's her little like snowflake skirt gatherer brooch thing. So anyways, as well as the fractionals that I did earlier. So thank you for watching and stitching along with me. I hope you have a lovely time stitching on your own projects and maybe beading, and have a wonderful week. Happy stitching. Bye.